The Renaissance period has always captured my imagination. It was a really wonderful design period. They were very obsessed with geometry, and in particular there was a thing called the golden section rule, which is all about sort of pleasing proportion. We all have a sense of what's right and wrong in proportion. We all have it in us. You can see, you know, the height of the table or whatever, the height of the chair, you know it's right. But what sort of the ancient Greeks did is they devised a sort of scientific mathematical equation, this golden proportion. And the Renaissance creators, the artists and everything, adopted this formula. So I thought it would be a great idea to explore these rules in a sort of modern garden setting using the sort of Renaissance gardens for inspiration. You can clearly see that I've divided up the garden into definite zones. For example, my sunken area is approximately 2/3 of the length of the garden. And as you can see, the whole thing is very pleasing in size. It all looks right because we've applied these rules to it. I've applied 3 axes of symmetry, one down the middle and then 2 on the side, to sort of divide it into 3 areas. And then the beds around the edge, again, are in proportion to those sections of the symmetry. If you notice the Italian cypresses, they're exceptionally tall, they're distorted, they're elongated. And some people might find that it's not in proportion to the garden, but actually the width, the way I've planted them 5 together, the width is in proportion. I've just elongated them to distort it, to create this drama within the garden. Conversely, at the other end of the garden, I've got the cork oak that's growing away from all this perfect symmetry and everything, as though sort of repulsed by it all. If you look at the stone in the garden, you can see that at the back of the garden, where it's sort of slightly more wild, that the stone is very rough. It's a travertine, natural travertine, as it comes out of the quarry, and it's what's called split-faced. It's as it comes out of the quarry, it's got these beautiful markings on it, lots of little indentations. They're very tactile and very, very, very natural. And then through each sort of section of the garden, each of these axes of symmetry, you'll see that the stone is slightly more refined and more controlled. I've had it honed, and then I've had it honed, filled and polished. So you've got the same stone, and it's being controlled by man, it's being tamed. At the front of the garden, I've got my artichokes. I know they're not in flower, they're not meant to be. I wanted them to imitate the fountains, so that's why the leaves come up and out like this. And it adds a little bit of sort of architecture to the front of the garden, and it's sort of acknowledging the sort of controlling fountains at the other end. When I was sort of setting up my rules to design this garden with, I thought I'd really like to take away all the flamboyance and decadence that you see in the Renaissance gardens. Yet I wanted to have this sort of controlling of water in a series of fountains things, and obviously fountains equals flamboyance. But what I've done is I've used laminar jets, so they're simple little jets, and if you can see, they're completely frictionless. So it's like a pure column of water. There's no fanciness about the water. It's a pure column of water, and it's hitting the canal and not making any noise again. So I've taken it down to the bare minimum. I've got sort of wild areas of planting, and I've got quite formal areas of planting, and I've tried to marry them together. You can see these definite ribbons of colour going through the garden using Rus crenata and Punica granatum and things like this. So I've got this definite ribbon of a sort of knot-like pattern going through the garden, and I've highlighted it with little bits of red flowers dotted through. I have got rosemaries, lavenders, thymes and oreganos and things, but I've tried not to be too cliche and use your bog standard ones. I've tried to be a bit different here, and also I wanted to keep a sort of muted colour scheme. So I've got this wonderful prostrate rosemary called Hypha that's hanging down over the edge of the walls. But I've been quite careful with the colours. I don't want to have too many bright colours in the garden. Where I've been focusing mostly with my colour is in the leaves. It's all about leaf colour and texture. I've got the lime greens through to the dark greens in the rosemaries, and whereas in the lavenders I have this silvers. In the osothamnus I've got silver. So I've tried to blend, as I say, without dominating each other, this careful bit of green and silver, and try to get them to weave through each other. And really any other flower colour apart from red is a bit of a bonus, and I wouldn't want too much of it. So this is all about muted colours, not about strong colour. Possibly my most exciting plant I've got in the garden, the one that I really wanted to get into the garden, and I have managed to, is Pelargonium ardens, which is a naturally occurring hybrid geranium. And as you can see, it's got very, very small petite flowers. It's not a garish red, it's a beautiful sort of almost ochre red, and it's really dainty, and it's one of those plants that really sort of makes your heart skip a beat when you see it. It's such a special plant, and I'm so thrilled to have it in the garden. There are 4 entrances into my garden, and this is, obviously quite impractical. I did it purely to explore this idea of symmetry and proportion. My main steps at the front of the garden are very, very wide. You can see they're very wide and very inviting, yet the other steps are much narrower to sort of show my sort of cross axes of symmetry, but they are also completely in proportion, and if you add the widths of the side steps, they equal the whole of the main steps. I mean, using all these rules when you're designing your own garden is a really good way to start out. You get this natural sort of harmonious relationship, and it's all very subconscious, but when you walk through the garden you'll get a much more comfortable feel. So the golden proportion is a perfect way of designing your own garden.